The rain poured like a curtain over the jagged alien landscape. The sky was dark, streaked with veins of orange lightning that split the heavy clouds above. Captain Elias Ward pressed his back against a sharp rock outcrop, his pulse pounding. As he scanned the terrain ahead, he was stranded, cut off from his crew after his shuttle had been shot down. His communicator was broken, his emergency beacon lost in the wreck, and his supplies barely enough to last 2 days. Yet survival was not optional. He had been in worse situations before, or at least that is what he kept telling himself. Through the rain, a sound cut through the storm. It was faint at first, a muffled voice, a cry. Elias froze. Listening, it came again, clearer this time, a weak, desperate plea. He gritted his teeth. He knew it was reckless to go looking for trouble, especially when mercenaries roamed this moon searching for survivors. But he also knew what he had to do. He adjusted the grip on his plasma pistol and moved quietly toward the sound. The slope was slippery with mud, and jagged alien plants brushed against his arms as he pushed through them. Every step made him more visible, more vulnerable. But that did not stop him. Soon, he spotted her. A figure lay half-collapsed near the roots of a massive, glowing tree. At first, Elias thought she was human. She had a human shape, a slender frame. Arms curled protectively around her chest, but as he drew closer, he saw the truth. Her skin shimmered faintly, reflecting the storm light in shades of deep blue and pale silver. Her hair was like strands of liquid metal, clinging wetly to her face. Her clothing was torn, revealing patches of strange, intricate markings across her shoulders and arms. She was wounded. One leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Elias crouched beside her, keeping his pistol ready in case this was a trap. But when her eyes opened, all suspicion faded. They were not the eyes of a soldier or an assassin. They were wide, frightened, and filled with pain. She said something in a language he could not understand, her voice soft and trembling. "It's okay," Elias said, keeping his tone calm. He pointed to himself. "Human, I'm not here to hurt you." She blinked at him, clearly confused, but when he reached slowly for her leg, she did not pull away. He studied the injury. A deep cut ran across her thigh, and her ankle was swollen, likely broken. He had limited medical supplies, but he could not leave her here. He pulled a small vial from his pack and sprayed a clotting foam over the wound, then tore a strip of his jacket to make a makeshift bandage. She winced but did not fight him. As he worked, his mind raced. Who was she? A civilian? A refugee? She had no weapons, no armor. But he had seen this kind of pursuit before. Whoever had done this would not stop until they had her. A sudden sound made Elias's instincts kick in. A sharp, mechanical hum. Engines. He dropped to his stomach, dragging her down with him just as a searchlight swept across the clearing. A small gunship hovered in the air, its red sensors scanning the area. He could make out the faint silhouettes of armed figures inside. Mercenaries. Elias's gut tightened. If they saw her, it would be over. He pressed his finger to his lips, urging her to stay silent. To his surprise, she obeyed without hesitation. Together they remained still as the gunship passed overhead. Only when it moved away, disappearing beyond the ridge, did Elias let out a slow breath. He helped her sit up. "We can't stay here," he said, even though he knew she did not understand. He pointed toward a cluster of jagged rocks in the distance. "Shelter. We go there." She looked at him for a moment, then nodded, supporting her weight. Elias guided her carefully over the slippery ground. Each step was slow and painful for her, but she did not complain. He admired her silent resilience, even injured and scared. She did not break down. Whoever she was no ordinary traveler. By the time they reached the rocks, night had fully fallen. The rain slowed to a drizzle, and the alien sky glowed faintly with strange constellations. Elias found a small crevice deep enough to provide cover. He helped her sit against the wall, then gathered what little dry material he could find to start a small, smokeless fire. As the fire crackled softly, he turned to her. "You need rest," he said, knowing she could not understand. Still, the tone seemed enough. She leaned back against the stone, her breathing shallow but steady for a long while. Elias studied her in silence. She was unlike any alien he had seen before, but there was something familiar in her expression, something human in the way she looked at him. Like she wanted to say thank you but did not know how. He unzipped his pack and pulled out a protein bar. Breaking it in half, he offered her a piece. She stared at it, cautious. But when he took a bite of his own portion, she hesitated only briefly before accepting hers. They ate quietly, the fire warming them both. Elias could not help but think about the mercenaries. They had been looking for her. But why? Was there a bounty? Was she a fugitive, or worse, bait for a trap? Yet none of it felt right. There was no malice in her eyes, only fear. Finally, he spoke, more to himself than to her. You don't deserve whatever they're trying to do to you, and I'm not going to let them have you. She tilted her head, as if trying to understand his words. Then, for the first time, she spoke in his language, just a broken words, but enough to make him freeze. Help me. Elias felt a weight settle on his shoulders, heavier than the rain-soaked pack on his back. He had been planning to survive alone, to wait for rescue or make his way off this moon. But now everything had changed. This wasn't just about survival anymore. He nodded firmly. I will. For the first time since he had found her, she allowed herself to close her eyes and rest, and for the first time since the crash, Elias felt a purpose beyond keeping himself alive. The morning came slowly on the alien moon. A pale golden light seeped through the cracks in the jagged rocks, illuminating the small crevice where Elias and the woman had taken shelter. The storm had passed, leaving the ground damp and the air heavy with a strange metallic scent. Elias sat near the fire's embers, sharpening a piece of metal he had scavenged from his crashed shuttle. He had not slept much. Every creak of the rocks, every distant hum of engines had kept him alert. He knew they were still being hunted. The woman stirred, her movements slow and cautious. When her eyes opened, she blinked at the dim light and then at him. Elias gave her a small nod. You're safe for now, he said, knowing she might not fully understand, but saying it anyway. She tried to sit up but winced in pain, clutching her injured leg. Elias immediately reached for his bag and pulled out a strip of fabric he had torn from his uniform. He soaked it with water from his canteen and carefully wrapped it tighter round her wound. She watched him work silently, her gaze steady but unreadable. There, he said, tying off the makeshift bandage. It's not perfect, but it'll hold until I can find something better. She tilted her head slightly, as if studying his words. Then she placed her hand briefly over his. A simple gesture, but one that made Elias pause. It was the first sign of trust she had shown since he had rescued her. Kayla, she said suddenly, her voice soft and clear. Elias looked at her, surprised. Kayla, she nodded, touching her chest. Kayla, he realized she was telling him her name. Kayla, he repeated slowly. Then he pointed to himself. Elias, she blinked once, then nodded. Elias. It was a small exchange, but it felt like progress. After a few moments, Elias stood and surveyed their surroundings. We can't stay here, he said. If those mercenaries find this place, we're finished. Kayla followed his gaze toward the open terrain beyond their shelter. She seemed to understand. Elias gathered his limited supplies, a few protein bars, a half-full canteen, and some scraps of metal he had shaped into crude tools. He had no working communicator, but he still had his pistol with a few shots left. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. He crouched beside her. Can you walk? Kayla tried to stand, using the rocky wall for support. She hissed in pain, but managed to put some weight on her good leg. Elias offered his arm, and after a brief hesitation, she took it. They moved slowly at first, Kayla leaning on him for balance. The terrain was uneven, with sharp stones and strange plants that hissed when touched. The sky was clearer now, revealing to suns in the distance and a horizon lined with black, twisted forests. Elias knew they needed better cover, someplace the mercenaries wouldn't think to search. As they walked, Kayla remained mostly silent, though her eyes scanned everything, every tree, every shadow, every distant sound. Elias wondered what kind of life she had lived before this. She carried herself with a quiet dignity, even while injured and on the run. After an hour of slow movement, they reached a shallow ravine. The ground there was soft, covered in patches of moss-like growth. Elias spotted a narrow cave entrance. At the base of a cliff, it wasn't much, but it would hide them from aerial scans. "This will do," he said, helping her inside. The cave was dark, but Elias used a small light from his pack to guide them deeper until they found a flat space. To rest, he set Kayla down carefully and checked her bandages again. She watched him closely as he worked, then spoke in her language words he could not understand, but her tone was thoughtful. Almost curious, "I wish I knew what you were saying," he said with a faint smile. "Would make things easier for both of us." She tilted her head again, as though trying to decode his words the same way he was trying to decode hers. Then she tapped her temple lightly and said, "Learn." Elias chuckled quietly. "Yeah, I'll try." They stayed in the cave for most of the day. Elias used the time to rest and repair his gear, while Kayla seemed to meditate, her eyes closed as she breathed in slow, steady rhythms. Occasionally, she would murmur something in her language, her voice soft and melodic. Elias found himself listening, wondering what those words meant later. Elias decided to scout the area. He didn't want to leave Kayla alone, but they needed food and water if they were going to survive more than a day. He knelt beside her and pointed to the cave entrance. "Stay here. I'll come back." She frowned, as if unhappy with the idea of being left behind. But after a moment she nodded. Elias ventured out cautiously, keeping low as he moved through the ravine. He managed to find a few edible plants and filled his canteen from a small stream. He also spotted something troubling: tracks, large, heavy boots had pressed into the damp soil. The mercenaries were nearby. His heart pounded as he returned to the cave. Kayla was waiting just where he had left her. When she saw his expression, her posture stiffened. "They're close," Elias said grimly. "We need to be ready." She seemed to understand his tone, if not his words. Slowly, she reached for a small object at her side, a curved metallic shard that looked like it had once been part of a weapon. Her fingers gripped it tightly. Elias stared at her. "You're not just some traveler, are you?" Kayla didn't answer. She only met his gaze with a quiet, unreadable expression. That night, as they sat by a small, hidden fire at the back of the cave, Elias thought about everything that had happened. He had gone from surviving alone to protecting someone who clearly carried more weight than she let on. The mercenaries wanted her for a reason, and yet, even with the danger closing in, he felt more determined than ever. Whatever secret Kayla carried, whatever risk came with helping her, he wasn't going to leave her behind. The night in the cave was cold, but Elias barely felt it. He sat against the rocky wall, his pistol in hand, staring at the cave entrance. Every sound outside made his body tense. The soft whistle of wind, the distant growl of some unseen creature, even the faint dripping of water echoing through the cave, it all kept him alert. Kayla had fallen asleep hours ago, her breathing slow and steady. She rested against the opposite wall, her arms wrapped around herself. Elias watched her for a moment. She looked fragile in sleep, but he knew better now. She had survived a crash, an injury, and mercenaries hunting her. Whoever she really was, she had strength. When morning came, Elias gently shook her awake. "We need to move," he said. She blinked at him sleepily, then sat up with a quiet nod. He had already packed their few supplies. "I saw tracks yesterday," he explained, pointing outside. "They're close. If we stay here, they'll find us." Kayla did not fully understand his words, but she understood the urgency in his tone. She pushed herself to stand, leaning on the wall for support. Elias offered his arm again, and she accepted without hesitation. They left the cave carefully, staying low as they moved through the ravine. The ground was damp from last night's rain, making every step louder than Elias liked. He tried to guide them along softer patches of moss, avoiding the open ground where tracks would be obvious. For a while, the journey was silent. Kayla kept her eyes on the horizon, scanning for movement, while Elias kept checking behind them. He He had learned long ago that silence was often the best way to survive. Then Kayla spoke, Elias. He glanced at her. Yeah, she pointed to the jagged trees ahead. Safe, she said in broken English. Elias frowned, unsure what she meant, but followed her lead. They approached the black forest cautiously. The trees were tall and twisted, their bark smooth and glistening like metal. The air here felt heavier, and the shadows cast by the strange leaves made it hard to see. But it was cover, and cover was what they needed. As they moved deeper, Elias noticed the ground was littered with fallen pods the size of his hand. They cracked under his boots with a soft crunch, releasing a faint, sweet smell. Kayla crouched and picked one up, inspecting it closely. She broke it open with her fingers and revealed a pale, fruit-like flesh inside. Food, she said simply. Elias raised an eyebrow. You're sure it's safe? She nodded and took a small bite. When nothing happened, she offered it to him. Elias hesitated, but then took a cautious bite. It was surprisingly sweet, like honey mixed with citrus. Not bad, he said. For a brief moment, the fear and tension lifted as they shared more of the strange fruit. Elias almost forgot they were being hunted, but then a sound cut through the forest to deep. Mechanical hum. Elias froze. He knew that sound. A drone. Run, he said sharply. Kayla did not need an explanation. She clung to his arm as they moved quickly through the forest, weaving between the trees. The hum grew louder, closer. Elias glanced up and saw it a small, black drone, scanning with a red light. Down, he whispered. They ducked behind a massive tree root, pressing themselves into the shadows. The drone hovered overhead, its light sweeping across the forest floor. Elias held his breath. Kayla stayed perfectly still, her grip on his sleeve tight, after what felt like an eternity. The drone drifted away. Elias exhaled slowly. That was too close, he muttered. Kayla looked at him, her expression tense. More, she said, gesturing toward the sky. Elias understood. If there was one drone, there would be more. They kept moving, faster this time. The forest seemed endless. But Elias spotted a rocky incline in the distance, if they could reach higher ground. Maybe they could see where the mercenaries were coming from. By the time they reached the rocks, Kayla was limping badly. Elias knew she needed rest, but they didn't have time. He helped her climb, using every bit of strength to pull her up when she stumbled at the top. They crouched behind a ridge. From here, Elias could see the forest stretching out for miles and, beyond it, a clearing where several black ships were parked. Mercenaries were moving in formation, scanning the area with long rifles. They're sweeping the forest, Elias said under his breath. He could count at least a dozen of them. Maybe more. Kayla followed his gaze. Her jaw tightened, she said. Something in her own language, her tone sharp and full of anger. Yeah, Elias said grimly. I don't like it either. He studied their movements. They were organized, professional. Whoever had sent them wanted Kayla badly. This wasn't just about money or a simple capture. This was something bigger. Why are they after you? He asked quietly. Kayla did not answer. She kept staring at the mercenaries, her expression unreadable. Elias sighed. Fine, don't tell me. But if I'm going to keep you alive, I need to know what we're up against. Still nothing. He shook his head. He didn't have time to press her. They needed a plan. If they stayed in the forest, the mercenaries would eventually corner them. But heading out into the open would be suicide. Elias spotted a narrow canyon to the east. It was risky, but it would give them cover and might lead them away from the search teams. He pointed toward it. We go there. Kayla followed his finger, then gave a short nod. The descent was steep, and Elias had to hold onto Kayla tightly to keep her from falling every few minutes. He glanced back at the forest, expecting to see mercenaries emerging from the trees. By the time they reached the bottom, the suns were beginning to set, casting long shadows across the canyon. Elias helped Kayla sit against the wall, both of them breathing heavily. We made it, he said. Though he knew they were far from safe, Kayla closed her eyes briefly, then looked at him. Thank you. Elias stared at her for a moment. It was the first time she had said those words in his language. He gave a tired smile. "Don't thank me yet. We've still got a long way to go." But as he looked around the canyon, he couldn't shake the feeling that their situation was about to get much worse. The canyon walls loomed high above them, dark and jagged, offering some protection from the sky, but also trapping them in a narrow path. Elias hated it. It felt like a cage. He kept his pistol in hand as they moved, his eyes scanning every shadow. Kayla walked beside him, limping but refusing to slow down. Her face was pale, and Elias could tell she was in pain. But she didn't complain. She never did. "We need to rest soon," Elias said, glancing at her. "You can't keep pushing yourself like this." Kayla shook her head. "Not safe," Elias sighed. "You're right, but you're going to collapse if we don't stop." Before she could answer, a faint sound echoed through the canyon. Elias froze, raising his hand for silence. It was voices distant but growing closer. Mercenaries. He pulled Kayla toward a rocky alcove just wide enough for them to squeeze into. "Stay quiet," he whispered. Moments later, two mercenaries appeared, walking along the canyon floor. They wore black armor and carried long rifles. Scanning the area as they spoke in a language Elias didn't recognize, Elias held his breath, his finger on the trigger. He could take them out if they got too close, but that would bring the rest down. On them, the mercenaries paused just a few feet from their hiding spot. One of them raised a small device, scanning for movement. Elias felt his heart pound in his chest. This was it, but then a sudden roar echoed from above. A massive winged creature flew overhead. Screeching as it passed, the mercenaries cursed and turned their weapons toward the sky. Elias didn't waste the distraction. He grabbed Kayla's arm and pulled her deeper into the canyon, moving as quickly and quietly as possible. They didn't stop until they were certain they were alone again. Elias leaned against the wall, catching his breath. "That was too close," Kayla nodded. Though her eyes were distant, she seemed deep in thought, as if something had shifted in her mind. "What is it?" Elias asked. She hesitated, then finally said, "You saved me." Elias blinked. "I wasn't about to let them take you. You know that." She looked at him for a long moment, then said, "You don't know who I am." Elias frowned. "You're Kayla. That's enough for me." Her expression hardened slightly. "No, you need to know." Elias crossed his arms. "Then tell me, why are they after you? Who are they?" Kayla took a slow breath. "I'm Kayla Vayari, daughter of the High Sovereign of the Vayari Empire." Elias stared at her, trying to process the words. "You're a princess?" She nodded once. "Yes." Elias ran a hand over his face. "Of course. That explains everything. No wonder they're after you. You're worth more than half the galaxy to them." Kayla's gaze dropped. "My father, dead. My people, betrayed. They want me because I'm the last." Her voice trembled slightly on the last words, but she quickly straightened, regaining her composure. Elias felt a wave of anger. "So they're trying to wipe out your whole family. A coup." Kayla nodded again. "Mercenaries work for them, for traitors." Elias cursed under his breath. This wasn't just a rescue mission anymore. He wasn't just helping some stranger survive. He was protecting the heir to an empire. He crouched in front of her. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I did not trust you," Kayla admitted quietly. Then she met his eyes. "But you risked your life for me. Twice. You deserve truth." Elias couldn't help but chuckle softly. "Well, I guess I should feel honored." But deep down, he knew. This changed everything. The stakes were far higher than he thought. "We need to get you out of here," he said firmly. "Someplace safe. Do you know if there are any loyal Vayari forces nearby?" Kayla hesitated. "Maybe. Old outpost. 2 days north, if it still stands. Then that's where we're going." Kayla's lips pressed into a thin line. "Dangerous. Yeah. Well, so is sitting here waiting for those mercenaries to find us." She didn't argue. As they continued through the canyon, Elias couldn't stop thinking about what she had told him. He had met royals before, usually the kind who stayed far from battlefields. But Kayla was different. She had been hunted, wounded, and still kept moving. She didn't act like someone who had spent her life surrounded by luxury. After a while, Kayla spoke again. Elias, he glanced at her. Yeah, you do not have to do this. They hunt me, not you. Leave me. And you live. Elias stopped walking and stared at her. Are you serious? After everything we've been through, I'm not leaving you. Here to die. Kayla studied him carefully. Why? Elias shrugged. Because it's the right thing to do. And because I've seen enough people abandoned when they needed help. I'm not adding you to that list for the first time. Kayla's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. Humans, different. Elias smirked. Yeah, you'll get used to it. They kept moving until the canyon opened into a wide plain. In the distance, Elias could see the faint outline of the forest they had left behind and, beyond it, smoke rising from the mercenary ships. They were spreading their search wider. We need to move fast, Elias said. Kayla glanced at the sky, then back at him. Night is safer. Elias frowned. You sure? She nodded. They see less, hear less. We moved then. It wasn't ideal. But she was right. Traveling in the open under the suns would make them easy targets. As they waited for nightfall, Elias set up a small camp behind a cluster of rocks. He gathered enough dry material to build a tiny fire and split another protein bar with Kayla. For a while, they sat in silence, the tension between them slowly replaced by something else, a strange sense of understanding. Finally, Elias broke the silence. So, Princess Kayla, what happens if we actually get you to that outpost? You take back your throne. Kayla's expression darkened. If I live, I fight. My people need hope. Elias nodded slowly. Then I guess we better make sure you live. Kayla looked at him for a long moment before quietly saying, Thank you. Elias smiled faintly. Don't mention it. Just promise me when this is over. You won't forget the idiot human who kept you alive. Kayla tilted her head. I will not forget. The suns dipped below the horizon, and the sky turned a deep shade of violet. The night was coming, and with it, the next step of their dangerous journey. The night air was sharp and cold as Elias and Kayla moved across the open plain. The stars above were unfamiliar to Elias, a strange map of glowing white and green dots that looked nothing like the skies of Earth. The moonlight cast long shadows behind them, stretching across the rocky ground like dark fingers. Elias kept his pistol ready as they walked. Every sound made his muscles tense, the crunch of loose stones under their boots, the distant calls of strange nocturnal creatures, even the wind that howled through the canyons they had left behind. Kayla walked beside him silently, her limp slowing them down, but she didn't complain. She was as focused as he was. They had been walking for nearly an hour when Kayla suddenly stopped. Elias turned to her. What is it? She pointed toward the east. At first, he saw nothing. Then he noticed faint flickers of light-moving lights. Patrols, Kayla said simply. Elias squinted. How many? She shook her head. Many, spread out, looking. Elias cursed under his breath. The mercenaries weren't just searching blindly anymore, they were closing in with precision. Whoever led them was smart and determined. We need to get off this plain, he said. Kayla scanned the horizon, then pointed toward a cluster of jagged rock formations ahead. There. Hide. It wasn't much, but it was better than being out in the open. They moved quickly, Elias supporting her when her injured leg slowed her down. As they reached the rocks, Elias guided her into a narrow gap between two massive boulders, just wide enough for them to squeeze inside. They crouched low, pressing their backs against the cold stone. Elias peered through a crack between the rocks. The lights were closer now, mercenaries with search lamps, sweeping the area with methodical precision. Stay quiet, he whispered. Kayla nodded. Her expression calmed despite the danger. Minutes passed like hours as the patrol drew nearer. Elias could hear their muffled voices and the hum of their scanning equipment. He gripped his pistol tightly, ready to fight if they were discovered. Then Kayla touched his arm lightly. Elias glanced at her. She whispered, I can help. Elias frowned. How? Kayla reached into a pouch on her torn clothing and pulled out a small, crystalline device. It glowed faintly in her hand. What is that? He asked. Signal disruptor. She explained in her broken English, confused. They're scanners. But short time only. Elias stared at her. You've had that the whole time? She gave a small nod. Why didn't you use it earlier? She looked away. Needed for last chance, not waste. Elias sighed. She wasn't wrong. If they used it now, they had to make it count. All right, he said. Do it. Kayla pressed a sequence on the device, and it emitted a soft pulse. Elias felt a strange vibration in the air, like a quiet hum that resonated in his bones. Outside, the patrol lights began to scatter, their search pattern breaking apart. Confused voices echoed across the plain as the mercenaries tried to recalibrate their scanners. It's working, Elias whispered. Kayla exhaled slowly, her grip on the device tightening. Not long. Elias knew what that meant. They had to move before the effect wore off. Come on, he said, helping her out of the hiding spot. They used the confusion to slip away from the patrols, moving quickly and quietly along the edge of the rock formations. Elias kept glancing over his shoulder, expecting to see lights following them, but for now, they were in the clear dot. After what felt like hours, they finally reached another canyon. This one was narrower, with steep walls that offered good cover. Elias helped Kayla down carefully, then guided her to a small ledge where they could rest. As they sat down, Kayla leaned back against the wall, breathing heavily. The signal disruptor had bought them time, but it had drained her. Elias could see the exhaustion in her face. You okay? He asked. She nodded weakly. Tired, but alive. Elias smirked. That makes two of us. For a moment, there was silence. Then Kayla spoke again. Why? Elias glanced at her. Why what? Why help me? She asked, her voice quiet but steady. You could leave. Be safe. But you stay. Elias stared at the canyon floor. Because it's what I do. I help people who need it. Back home, we don't leave someone behind. Kayla tilted her head. Human way. Yeah, Elias said. At least, it's supposed to be. Kayla studied him for a long moment. Strange, my world. No one helps without reason. Elias chuckled softly. Well, maybe that's why you need me. She looked away, but he could see the faintest hint of a smile on her face. The moment of quiet didn't last. A distant rumble echoed through the canyon. Elias tensed immediately. Kayla's eyes widened. They follow. Elias peered over the ledge. In the distance, more lights were approaching, this time accompanied by the heavy thrum of engines. The mercenaries were bringing in larger vehicles, ground transports. They're not giving up. Elias muttered. Kayla clutched the crystal device in her hand, but Elias shook his head. Save it. If we use it again now, it won't help later. She nodded reluctantly. Elias thought quickly. They couldn't outrun the transports in their condition, and fighting was suicide. They needed another way. There, Kayla said suddenly, pointing to a narrow crevice on the other side of the canyon. Old tunnel, from before war. Elias raised an eyebrow. You're sure it's still there? She hesitated, then said, Maybe. Elias repeated. Well, that's better than nothing. They moved as fast as Kayla's injury allowed, crossing the canyon floor toward the crevice. The sound of engines grew louder, the lights of the mercenaries closing in. By the time they reached the tunnel entrance, Elias could see the patrols sweeping into the canyon behind them. He said urgently. They squeezed through the narrow gap, finding themselves in a dark, crumbling passageway that smelled of dust and decay. Elias used his small light to guide them forward. Behind them, voices echoed. The mercenaries had found their trail. Keep moving, Elias urged. Kayla limped faster, determination burning in her eyes. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading deeper underground. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter, but Elias knew it was only a matter of time before the mercenaries followed. Finally, they emerged into a wider chamber. It was empty except for a few broken crates and strange markings on the walls. Kayla collapsed against the wall, breathing hard. We can rest, Elias said. Though his own chest heaved with exhaustion, Kayla closed her eyes briefly, then whispered, Thank you. Elias sat beside her, pistol still in hand. Don't thank me yet. We're not out of this. But as he looked at her, this injured, hunted princess who refused to give up, he realized something had changed. He wasn't just protecting her because it was the right thing to do. He wanted her to survive, not because she was royalty, but because she was Kayla, and he would do whatever it took to make sure she lived. The underground chamber was silent except for the sound of their breathing. Elias sat with his back against the cold stone wall, his pistol across his lap. He stared into the darkness of the tunnel they had come from, listening for any sign of pursuit. Kayla sat nearby, her eyes closed, conserving her strength. They had only a few moments to rest. Elias knew the mercenaries would find the tunnel soon. They weren't ordinary bounty hunters. These were professionals. "We can't stay here," Elias said quietly. Kayla opened her eyes. "Where go?" Elias pointed deeper into the tunnel. "If this place is as old as you say, there has to be another way out," Kayla nodded, though she looked doubtful. "Long way, maybe blocked." Elias smirked faintly. "Story of my life." He pushed himself to his feet and offered her his hand. She took it, using his arm to pull herself up. Her leg was worse now, swollen from the strain of their escape. Elias adjusted his grip, supporting more of her weight as they moved. The deeper parts of the tunnel were even darker, and the air grew heavier. Old metal supports lined the walls, rusted and barely holding the structure together. The markings on the stone were strange, symbols that Elias didn't recognize. Kayla brushed her fingers over them as they passed, whispering something in her language. "What do they mean?" Elias asked. Kayla glanced at him. "Old Veari. Warnings. This place dangerous long ago." Elias gave a dry laugh. "Of course. It is." They moved slowly, careful not to make noise. But after a while, Elias stopped. He could hear something faint, the echo of boots on stone. "They're here," he whispered. Kayla's grip on his arm tightened. Elias scanned the tunnel ahead. They couldn't keep running like this. Kayla was too injured, and there was no guarantee this tunnel led anywhere safe. They needed to slow their pursuers. "Kayla," Elias said, lowering his voice, "can you walk without me for a bit?" She frowned. "Yes, but why?" He pointed to the walls. "We can set a trap. By sometime." Kayla's eyes lit with understanding. "Old crates. Use them." They hurried back to the chamber they had passed a few minutes earlier. Elias worked quickly, stacking the broken crates and debris near the tunnel entrance. Kayla limped to the far side, gathering loose rocks and tossing them toward him. "Good," Elias said. "We can block the path." And he pulled a small device from his belt, a thermal charge salvaged from his shuttle. It wasn't powerful enough to bring down the tunnel, but it could make a mess. Kayla eyed the device. "Explosion, exactly." Elias said, "We'll leave them a little surprise." They set the charge behind the debris and rig it with a makeshift trigger, using the crystal device Kayla had used earlier. When the mercenaries stepped close enough, it would detonate. Once everything was in place, Elias grabbed Kayla's arm. Time to move. They went deeper into the tunnels, leaving the trap behind. Elias hated retreating, but fighting a dozen mercenaries head-on wasn't an option. They hadn't gone far when the sound of voices echoed through the tunnel. The mercenaries were close now. Elias guided Kayla to a narrow side passage. They crouched low, hiding in the shadows. The mercenaries arrived moments later. Through the crack in the rocks, Elias saw them heavily armed, moving in formation. Their helmets glowed faintly in the dark, scanning for movement. The first one stepped into the chamber. Elias whispered, "Now." Kayla pressed the trigger. The explosion shook the tunnel, a deafening roar that sent dust and debris flying. Screams echoed as the front line of mercenaries was thrown backward, and the tunnel partially collapsed, blocking their path. Elias didn't wait to see the result. "Go," he shouted, pulling Kayla along. They ran as fast as they could, deeper into the tunnel. The air grew thicker with dust, making it hard to breathe. Elias coughed but didn't slow down. They had bought time, but it wouldn't last. After several minutes, they stumbled into another large chamber. This one was different. It wasn't natural. The walls were smooth, lined with ancient machinery that hummed faintly with energy. "What is this place?" Elias asked. Kayla looked around. On her eyes, sanctum, old Veari shelter, forgotten. Elias frowned. "Does it still work?" "Maybe," Kayla said, limping toward a large console in the center of the room. Elias followed her, scanning the chamber. There were multiple tunnels leading out, but which one led to safety? Kayla placed her hand on the console. The symbols on it glowed faintly under her touch. She muttered something in her language, and the hum of the machines grew louder. "What are you doing?" Elias asked. "Waking it," Kayla replied. "It can help us." Before Elias could ask how, a new sound reached his ears, metal scraping against stone. He turned and saw shadows moving at the far end of the chamber. "They're coming," he said, raising his pistol. Kayla didn't stop working. "Hold them," Elias cursed. "Yeah, no pressure." The first mercenary stepped into the room, weapon raised. Elias fired, the shot striking the man's chest plate and sending him sprawling. Another came through. Then another. Elias took cover behind a broken pillar. Firing at anything that moved, the mercenaries returned fire, their shots sparking against the ancient walls. "Kayla," Elias shouted, "whatever you're doing, do it faster." Kayla's fingers danced across the glowing symbols. Suddenly, the entire chamber shuddered, and bright lines of energy lit up along the walls and floor. "What did you do?" Elias yelled. Kayla turned to him, her face calm. "Defense system." A low hum filled the room. Panels in the walls slid open, revealing ancient automated turrets. They locked onto the mercenaries and opened fire with precise energy blasts. The mercenaries shouted in panic, scrambling for cover as the turrets cut them down. Elias stared in shock. "I'm starting to like this place." Kayla gave a faint smile. Old VR tech, still strong. Within minutes, the surviving mercenaries retreated, dragging their wounded with them. The turrets powered down, leaving the chamber silent again. Elias lowered his pistol, breathing heavily. That was impressive. Kayla leaned against the console, exhaustion clear in her face. "Safe, for now." Elias walked over to her. "You just saved us both." Again, Kayla met his gaze. "No, we saved each other." For a long moment, they simply stood there, catching their breath in the glow of the ancient sanctuary. Elias finally broke the silence. "So, Princess, what's next? We can't stay here forever." Kayla straightened. "We go to the outpost. My people may be waiting." Elias nodded. "Then we'll make it, together." And for the first time since this ordeal began, Elias truly believed it. The ancient chamber hummed softly, its strange VR machinery still glowing faintly. Elias leaned against a cracked pillar, reloading his pistol. Every muscle in his body ached, but his mind was sharp. He knew this wasn't over. Kayla stood by the console, her hand resting on its glowing surface. Her breathing was slow and controlled, though Elias could see the exhaustion in her posture. She had been through more than anyone should endure, yet she remained unshaken. "They will return," she said quietly. Elias nodded. "Yeah, and they'll come harder this time." Kayla's eyes shifted toward the far tunnel. "We cannot stay. Outpost closed now. One more night's walk." "One more night," Elias repeated, thinking, "if we leave now, we risk running straight into them. If we stay, they'll corner us." Kayla tilted her head slightly. "You have plan?" Elias rubbed his jaw, staring at the door where the mercenaries had fled. "We make them pay for coming after us. Set traps. Hit them hard enough they think twice about following." Kayla studied him for a moment, then gave a slow nod. "Fight." Elias allowed himself a grim smile. "Yeah, fight." They moved quickly, using the scraps of ancient machinery and broken crates. Elias and Kayla created barricades near the entrance of the chamber. Kayla showed him how to activate more of the defense systems, old turrets hidden in the walls. "Not many shots left," Kayla warned. "Then we make everyone count," Elias replied. As they worked, Elias kept glancing at Kayla. She moved carefully, favoring her injured leg, but there was no hesitation in her actions. She was more than a princess. She was a survivor. When everything was ready, Elias crouched behind the largest barricade. "Now we wait." The waiting was the worst part. Hours passed. The only sound the faint hum of the chamber. Elias's thoughts drifted about the crash, about how close he had been to dying, about how strange his life had become since meeting Kayla. Then he heard it, the rumble of heavy boots. "They're here," Elias muttered. Kayla stood beside him, calm and steady. We hold. The first mercenary appeared at the tunnel entrance. Scanning the room with a bright lamp, Elias held his breath, waiting for more. Then they came 10, maybe 12 soldiers, heavily armed. Their black armor gleaming in the faint light. Elias gripped his pistol. Here we go. The lead mercenary shouted a command, and they advanced. Elias fired first, dropping the front soldier with a clean shot. The chamber erupted with noise, shouts, gunfire, and the hum of energy as Kayla activated the defense systems. The old turret sprang to life, spitting bright blue blasts that cut through the mercenaries' formation. Push them back, Elias shouted, firing at anything that moved. The mercenaries returned fire, their bullets sparking against the barricades. One of them threw an explosive, but it bounced off the wall harmlessly before detonating. The ancient structure held strong. Kayla stayed at the console, using the old systems to shift power between the defenses. Left side weak, she called out. Elias pivoted, firing at the flank where two mercenaries had broken through. They fell, their weapons clattering to the floor. But more kept coming. Elias knew they couldn't hold forever. Kayla, any more tricks with this place? She touched the console, her fingers flying over the glowing symbols. Yes, but dangerous. Do it, Elias said without hesitation. Kayla pressed a final sequence, and the entire room shook. A low rumble echoed through the walls as heavy stone panels descended, sealing off some of the tunnels. Others collapsed entirely, cutting off the mercenaries' reinforcements. The remaining mercenaries hesitated, unsure whether to advance or retreat. Elias used the pause to his advantage. He vaulted over the barricade and charged forward, firing as he moved. He took down two before ducking behind another pillar. Kayla watched in silence, ready to use the console again if needed. The mercenaries, realizing they were losing, regrouped for a final push. Elias gritted his teeth. He was running out of ammunition, and the turrets were almost silent now, their energy depleted. Then Kayla shouted, "Now!" Elias dove behind cover as Kayla activated one last defense mechanism. A bright pulse shot through the chamber, disorienting the mercenaries. They stumbled, clutching their helmets as the pulse scrambled their visors. Elias didn't hesitate. He aimed and fired, picking them off one by one until the survivors retreated, dragging their wounded out of the room. The silence that followed was deafening. Elias dropped to one knee, breathing hard. That was close. Kayla limped over to him. "We live." He laughed weakly. "Yeah, we live." They stayed there for a few minutes, catching their breath. Elias knew this wasn't the end. The mercenaries wouldn't stop. But for now, they had bought themselves time. "We should go," Elias said finally, "before they come back with more." Kayla nodded. "Outpost, not far." Elias helped her up, and together they left the ancient chamber behind. The journey to the outpost was slow. Kayla's legs slowed them down, and Elias was running on pure adrenaline. But when they finally crested a ridge and saw the faint glow of lights in the distance, hope sparked in his chest. "That it?" Elias asked. Kayla nodded. "Yes, Veari outpost." They approached cautiously, unsure if it was occupied by friend or foe. But as they drew closer, a group of armored figures emerged, their weapons raised. Elias raised his hands. "Don't shoot. We've had a long night." Kayla stepped forward, speaking rapidly in her own language. The soldiers froze, then lowered their weapons. One of them knelt. Elias blinked. "Okay, I'm guessing that's good." Kayla turned to him, her expression softening. "Safe now." The Veari soldiers led them inside the outpost. It was old but functional, with medical equipment and supplies. Elias finally let himself relax as Kayla was guided to a treatment table. "You'll be all right now," Elias said quietly. Kayla looked at him, her eyes steady. "Because of you." Elias smirked. "We make a good team." She gave a small nod. "Human friend." The word struck Elias harder than he expected. He smiled faintly. "Yeah, friend." For the first time since his crash, Elias felt something more than just survival. He felt purpose. And as he looked at Kayla, surrounded by her people, he knew this wasn't the end of their story. It was only the beginning.